Starting the video this morning from a suburban cul-de-sac here at the location on the very street, the dead-end street where one Johnny Gosch, a 12-year-old paperboy in the fall of 1982, lived. And we're going to retrace the steps of this kid who disappeared that day in September of 82, and his whole story begins again in this little dead-end street where he lived and where he woke up very early to start his paper route, which was a job that a lot of kids had. I myself was a paper boy, so I can kind of identify with the whole concept, right? And we'll talk a little more about what that was like, but I do want to really set the scene here for you before we retrace the steps of this kid who went out to deliver papers and was never seen again. I kind of want to set the scene of the times, because being a kid in the 80s was very different than today. Kids were very independent, and they just sort of went about their lives without very much adult supervision directly, right? It was kind of like a be home for dinner or be back by dark kind of situation. And kids were, as a result of that, they were in more dangerous kind of scenarios perhaps, or situations where you really had to be pretty careful and stuff, in comparison to today, where it's much more of a direct supervision, never out of sight, helicopter-y technology kind of stuff that is meant to protect kids from the very thing that we are talking about this early morning. And I wanted to be here in the neighborhood at the time, right at sunrise, when Johnny Gosch would have been going out for his paper route for the last time. So, speaking of that era and how different it was for kids who were growing up at the time, a couple of movies come to mind. If you really want to get the feel again for what that was like, you might have seen the movie E.T., right? That's an example. Another would be The Goonies. You might have heard of something called Better Off Dead. That was an older kind of kid experience, or Ferris Bueller's Day Off, stuff like that, right? Where those portrayals of growing up at that time are pretty accurate. Of course, it wasn't all as exciting necessarily as it was. It could be very boring, but that level of freedom that kids had is something that's very different than what probably you would see today. And so we have to keep that in mind when we think about the experiences kids had. So personally, I want to tell you a quick story. When I was a paper boy, I had a similar experience to what we're going to talk about today. The big difference being that my experience amounted to nothing. And so that's the important part to keep in mind, is that these kids back then, they did encounter kind of like dangerous situations at times, but usually things turned out okay, right? Usually it turned out for no big deal. In the case of Johnny Gosch, it did not turn out as no big deal, but I didn't even know about his case until much later in life. At the time that I was a paper boy, I probably would have been about 11 years old or something. Johnny was 12, so that's kind of the age group. But I remember on at least two occasions where a car was following me early in the morning, still dark, mostly, right? And the first time it followed me only for a short time, and then not long after, when I was just walking down the sidewalk delivering my papers, it followed me for a really, really long time. So I didn't know whether I should be scared or what, because it was my neighborhood that I was in. I was very comfortable there. And so I didn't really experience so much fear. It was almost a situation where I thought to myself, I'm never going to tell anybody about this, because it's sort of like it was just my little thing, and I just knew that it would cause, maybe my parents would say I can't do the paper route anymore or something. we're coming up now on where we're going to start retracing Johnny's steps. And this is a fence down here. Today it's a big fence that runs along this kind of main road, Ashworth. And the reason we're starting the story here is that Johnny sort of cut through his neighbor's yards when he started his route that morning, so he didn't, he took a shortcut, and at the time this fence wouldn't have been here, so he would have been able to come through here, and basically the cul-de-sac where we started the video is behind that fence, and so again, fence not there at the time, he would have just shortcut through some of his neighbor's yards in order to get out here onto Ashworth Road more quickly and easily. And yeah, so he's walking through his neighbor's yards. That's the first evidence that we have, or the first kind of witness that morning would be his neighbor who heard Johnny that morning with his wagon. So he had a wagon with him to carry the newspapers, as well as his little dog, little dachshund named Gretchen was also with him that morning. And so after cutting through his neighbor's yard and sort of coming out onto the sidewalk here in that fence area back there today, he's out here, he's walking down to a point that's known as a paper drop. And a newspaper drop is a spot where all the paper boys in one area will converge in the morning to try to sort out whose papers are who and get going on their routes, right? So a big truck arrives in the wee hours of the morning, dumps a bunch of papers onto a corner sidewalk, and that's where the paper boys will kind of converge for the start of their routes. So the way this looks is that, it's a little hard to see there, but off on this side is a large church. So again, we said that the cul-de-sac where Johnny lives is back in there, and he shortcutted out to where that fence is today, but the fence again not there at the time, to a main road here, Ashworth Road, and it's right down where you see this stoplight on the corner here, or intersection here, where a lot of the events of that morning took place. So let's talk about what happened down here. There is a car that makes a big appearance that morning, and that car is believed to have been how Johnny Gosch got abducted and just disappeared from this neighborhood that morning. So he's walking down here, and there's a Ford Fairmont, I think it's a Ford Fairmont, that the other newspaper boys who again converged here to pick up their papers, they established that this Ford Fairmont had been sitting at this intersection for quite some time. By the time Johnny got there, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, this car had been sitting here. And so as Johnny approaches the intersection, and the paper drop would have been right on that corner over there, as Johnny approaches, the Ford Fairmont is sitting here, and through the passenger side window, the driver sort of starts communicating with Johnny, asking him for directions right about at this spot here. And Johnny told him something quickly, and the car then U-turned and went back down Ashworth Road from this corner, right? So you just imagine a quick interaction here through the passenger side window, and then the car just U-turns back down there. So Johnny walks over, and he starts over to this little corner right here, and he starts trying to figure out which papers are his.
Let's pause for a moment and get an overview of this very compact area. I realized in editing that my selfie cam was in a mirrored orientation, so as I was flipping back and forth front and back cam, you've been getting a little bit different orientations from those two cameras, but I think this map will really help set everything straight in terms of the lay of the land. The first thing to note is this cul-de-sac here. That is where Johnny Gosch lived. And that morning, instead of walking all the way around the way that we did, he instead, of course, cut through his neighbor's yard out to the main road here. And it was down on this corner where he had these two encounters with this creepy guy, this car. And they were both on the corner. The guy came back a second time and again spoke with Johnny Gosch. And at that point, Johnny turned things over to Mr. Rossi, so the only adult there on the corner that morning. And Mr. Rossi spoke to the creepy guy through the passenger side window and got a good enough look to be able to say that the guy looked wide awake, so probably had not slept all night, and also said looked like he might be on drugs. But we do have to take that with a grain of salt given the times that we're talking about here. In any case, after again Mr. Rossi now giving the guy directions, he once again for a second time makes a U-turn and goes back down this road where you see my cursor going. So that was the last time Mr. Rossi saw the guy, but it does seem that Johnny encountered him again. We are going to follow Johnny's very brief paper route that morning. He only made it 1 block from picking up his papers down to or up to this next corner here where he was last seen and disappeared.
From that corner, he's now walking up a little street here where the next witness to all of this is going to come into play. And that is a kid named Mike. So Mike's still back on the corner back there, kind of figuring out where his newspapers are. And Mike sees from that corner back there, and again, it's still kind of dark out, but Mike sees a shadowy figure emerge as Johnny walks down the very sidewalk that we're walking down right now. From the corner, he witnesses what he describes as a tall man emerge from sort of a clump of trees and some darkness across the street over there. So just imagine that you're a paper boy, you're walking along, you're not really paying that much attention because, you know, it's morning and you're a kid. And some creepy guy starts emerging back there, crosses the street and starts walking down the sidewalk behind Johnny just as we're walking now. And that's Mike's account of what he saw, again, back from the corner back there from the paper drop. So he doesn't have much detail, but it sure wasn't far before Johnny disappeared. You can see the corner back there, and we're coming up right now on the corner where Johnny disappeared. So it's only from that intersection with the light down there to this corner here, right? You can see there's a street there, and that is the sidewalk corner where Johnny Gosch was abducted from, and we're very confident that he was abducted from this point right here that I will show you. And that is where his wagon full of newspapers was found later that morning. And again, this was the last spot. We have the last witness that I'll tell you about who witnessed something right here on the corner, and that was there was a teenager. So a lot of the witnesses here are people, they're not adults, right? We just have Mr. Rossi and that's it. But there was a teenager who lived on this corner, and he was awake early that morning and heard a car door slam. When he looked out the window, he saw once again a Ford Fairmont, which he described as being silver on the top part and darker color on the bottom part of that car. So again, it appears to be the same car that we saw twice earlier. And what he basically said, again, here's the corner where Johnny's wagon was discovered, and this last witness said that he heard a car door slam. He looks out the window to see a Ford Fairmont here, and then drives off down that way. In the case of Johnny Gosch, we have not seen him since that September morning, and just thought you might want to see this place for yourself, as I did want to see. And I hope you will join us for some other videos, some mysterious kind of videos such as this one, serious videos that we really try to dig into what life is all about. And today talked a little bit about the 80s and a very serious situation that happened right here